Welcome to a special edition of Doug and Friends. I should say Doug and Friends and Family. Actually, mainly
Doug and Friend and Descendants.
Yeah, it's Doug and Friend and Family. So I'm the friend, and here's Doug. And I actually have three generations of Wilson men. Pastor Wilson, we'll call you Coach Wilson. And then Rory the Wall Wilson joining us from New York. So we're here to talk about what's been going on this week, and wanted to start with actually a quote. This is a fun little quote that I came across in teaching my lordship class this week. This is from Rules for Reformers, and Doug, you wrote this. This was written about 10 years ago. If I am allotted more than the proverbial 70, which would be 70, which you are, right this minute.
In a few weeks, I will have been allotted
more than. Okay. He says, I hope that as my children and grandchildren are hitting their stride, and on the next page you say, and giving the progressive fits, that my contribution is that of making penetrating geezer comments from the corner of the living room after Sabbath dinner. So right on schedule. Here we are. So looking forward to geezer
It's
comments.
not Sabbath dinner though.
It's
so
not.
They could be penetrating comments, but
yes. And I'm not a geezer yet.
I'm not a geezer yet. Good. Well, we wanted to kick this off by Rory. For everybody who's, I'm assuming lots of folks have seen it, but they may not have seen all of the interviews and things like that you've been doing the last few days. So maybe give us the quick rundown of kind of what happened, just the basics of, how'd you end up in front of that building?
Well, there had been protests happening at Colombia for a long time. It started off after October 7th, 2023, when Hamas invaded Israel. There was a big demonstration immediately in the main quad of Columbia's campus. And it had really intensified in the last few weeks leading up to the end of the semester. And ultimately, a bunch of students set up a camp in the middle of campus, defying the university. The university cleared them out. Then they just set up a camp again in a different place, and the university didn't do anything. And it just continued to escalate until the university decided to suspend everyone who refused to comply with their orders, and they proceeded to take over one of the university buildings to occupy it, trying to relive a Vietnam demonstration from 1968. And so I was already in bed when this was happening, and a couple of friends got me up, said something was going down. And so I ran over to campus to see what was happening and a number of my friends were there, and I ended up going, because they were dragging a bunch of steel tables to barricade the main doors of this building. I ended up running up with the tables as they were taking them up and trying to just keep them from barricading some of the main doors, so that if police came, it'd be an easier situation to deal with. And ultimately, the police never came. Security never came, even after 911 calls to campus security. And so it turned into more of a statement than anything, because no one ended up coming to help. So they did eventually take over the building and occupy it. And then NYPD came and cleared it last night with hundreds of cops.
The NYPD did show up eventually.
Yeah, it took them about a day, and then they came.
A day and a lot of shame. I took a lot of shame, and then they came and, en masse.
Yeah, they came. I spoke to one deputy. Let's see, what was his? I don't remember his title, but someone in the NYPD who said that they had like 4,000 people who were ready to participate. I only think several hundred participated, but it was definitely a pretty big thing.
Whereas if 4 cops, and maybe even just 2, had showed up when you and Charles were at the front door of the building, it would have changed everything.
Definitely would have made a difference. I don't know exactly what would have happened, but it would have been better than nothing.
So when people watch the clip, they kind of see the main clip is Charles sort of getting nudged or weaseled off by that one. To me, say a little bit about like what was your sort of observations about the tactics as they were trying to to move you guys, but not get too physical or something like that? What was that about?
And
Yeah,
tell
they
us,
were
and tell
mostly
us about
just-
Charles too.
Yeah, tell us about Charles too. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So my friend Charles, he's been a good friend over my time at Columbia. He grew up in Malibu, was not Christian, became a Christian over his time in college. And so I've gotten to know him quite well. And we just happened to both be there at the same time.
Okay.
We didn't coordinate it.
Let's flag that Charles is also an Idahoan at this point. He's a transplant. You're born and raised, which is pretty funny.
Yeah, we're both Idaho residents right now.
Okay. Okay.
Two Idahoans against the mob.
Against the mob. So when the mob is there, but it's this funny mob because it's not a mob that was like, let's, grab them, throw them on the ground and beat them up. It was a mob that was like, hey, everybody link arms and kind of like nudge them along or something. So what was the tactics?
It was a boa constrictor. It was a boa constrictor fight.
Yeah, it was mostly, they definitely weren't trying to get, clearly a lot of students, they weren't trying to escalate it. So I think that's why they were doing that sort of thing. They also were, I'd say, very disproportionately women. So, and they were not larger than us. So because of that, I think they definitely were being pretty forceful in shoving it. So my friend Charles wasn't actually just nudged away. They forced him, like it was the mass of the crowd that forced him away. I told him not to escalate it because, well, in a mob it could get dangerous.
Right.
So apart from direct like fighting, they weren't just nudging.
Yeah.
They were also issuing some pretty great threats. Like they just constantly telling you you're going to get hurt. Like this will hurt. Like we're going to hurt you. He was like, this is going to hurt if you don't stop, if you don't get out of the way, And it was then the boa constrictor game, like the Indian leg wrestling of like the arm connections. And Charles seemed like he actually left the ground. I don't know if they got him off the ground, but it's like he was being carried away physically, accusing them of kidnapping.
Yeah, I think he did
pretty interesting.
Leave the ground for a moment, but not.
They didn't crowd surf him, but they did. Yeah, they did. They just kind of walked him off. Were you hanging onto the door handles?
Yeah,
yeah. There was one time when the guy who was more of a terrorist organizer who was all in black with the full swaddled mask, like walked up. He like came from behind and then just like tried to take control and walked over the table and tried to get behind you, trying to lever you off when you actually just bent over like and just like grabbed the table and wedged your rear end against the door. I was having visions of Rory boxing out, some old rebounding, some old rebounding drills. But what was he trying to accomplish? Like, what was that guy going for?
Well, I'd seen that guy before in the main encampment on campus. He had tried to intimidate myself and one of my friends when we'd gone through. We just kind of walked into the encampment. We clearly didn't fit in. And so he started trailing us, yelling Zionists, and was saying some stuff in Arabic, which I gathered was not nice, given that just from the tone, his glares at us. And then when one of the other Arabic speakers didn't know what he meant by one of the words, he translated it, and it was inbreeders. So some sort of Zionist inbreeders. I don't know what the other stuff was. But he was trying to, he got down and he was kind of wrestling my leg and trying to leverage me away from the door and flip me over. I'm not entirely, I think he just was trying to get me out of the way by physical force.
So when, people see the clip and then it kind of cuts at some point, a lot of them, how did it actually end? Like what made you, like, when did you guys left, they let you go, they got through other ways. How did it kind of resolve? And then you headed back to your apartment or whatever.
I stayed there for a bit. To be honest, I really cannot tell how long. I had very bad sense of time when all that was going on. It probably was shorter than it felt, but ultimately, I had a friend who they let through who told me that he thought I was at like pretty imminent threat of serious injury. And he wasn't really explaining everything at the time, and I didn't know whether he knew if there were other people who were coming or that sort of thing. So he was very, very insistent, and I thought that I should probably just go.
Could have turned it into 13 hours in Benghazi, because it turned out that no one was coming. I mean, the plan was you were holding the door for campus security, but campus security was not coming. There was no cavalry on its way. I would say here's a random question for you, and I asked this kind of somewhat facetiously, but there's a bunch of idiots on the internet, and I don't know if you know that.
No, I have no idea.
There's a bunch of idiots on the internet, and a lot of them want to take up the sort of the mascot job of conservatism or of Christian nationalism or fill in the blank, but they're just not smart people and have no principles. And so they're very confused about defending anything. Why you would defend, a building? Why would you step in? And I think that's interesting. Thought experiment would be, can you imagine, and let's just pretend that this would happen, because it wouldn't happen. But if that crowd was all Jewish students who had all been harassing Palestinian students, and a crowd of Jewish students were trying to take a building, like, would you do anything differently? It's like, or would you just go block the door the exact same way?
Well, in this hypothetical world, it's kind of hard to understand what the surrounding issues are.
Yeah, it doesn't even matter.
I think I'd want to come in and help out and prevent it from getting as damaged before security or police came.
Yeah, it does, and it doesn't matter. Like a lot of the dummies out there don't understand that if there was somebody who was, let's say we're in Moscow, Idaho, you're not, but we are. If Koberger was being transported to trial and a mob decided to try to lynch him, like, we would fight the mob. We would try to stop the mob. And it doesn't matter if the person the vigilantes are wanting to execute is guilty or not guilty. It doesn't matter if the target is in any way innocent or blameless. What matters is that the mob is not innocent.
But because the principal thing you're defending is the rule of law.
Yeah.
Not a building, and not the liberalism that is taught in the building.
Right.
You're defending order. And you're fighting anarchy.
And in this case, the building was, you told me, a building that you spent most of your time in, or more time in that building than in the other buildings on campus. And these are people who are not even in the community. These are, being led by professional protesters. But the principles of basically, and Rory, you and I have talked about this a little bit, but it doesn't change a ton of logic. But in these moments, it does help to think not in terms of the rights or the vested holiness of whatever's being targeted, but the lack of authority of those targeting it. So it's not about the positive virtue of the thing that you're defending so much as that these people do not have the authority. They are not the magistrate. They don't have the sword. And you would just as quickly defend a Panda Express, or anything
especially
else.
If you're hungry.
Yeah. And it doesn't much matter. And then there's also people, I mentioned Koberger, the murderer, but there's people being just stupid about, like, well, if a mob was going to firebomb an abortion clinic, like, you would never step in. It's like, of course I would. Like, absolutely I would. Even in a society where laws had been passed and abortion had been fully criminalized, if the mob was trying to take care of it instead of the rule of law, it's like, no, you fight the vigilante. You stand up to vigilantism. Let law, due process, take its course. And I think people are just, like, they lose all sense of principles or reason, and they think that Christianity is just rule, or Christian nationalism is ruled by a different mob. And it's just utterly ridiculous.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you mentioned that these protests started last fall, right after October 7th. And I think I remember hearing, maybe from your mom, maybe it was from you, I can't remember, that when that mob showed up to celebrate what had happened on October 7th, I think you went down and kind of inserted yourself there too. Would you want to tell a little bit about what you did last fall?
Yeah, that one probably more than even what they were doing here really ticked me off, given that, like, even if you really don't like Israel, even if you think Israel is an illegitimate state, go as far as some of these protesters do, celebrating the massacre of innocent people is just not okay. And that's clearly what those sorts of things are doing. Even if someone might deny it, it is by your actions celebrating Hamas's attacks. And so that one really bothered me. So I went through the crowd, I had a kippah, put it on in solidarity with Israel. So I guess maybe that scenario illustrates that my sympathies are not just for the rule of law here, though obviously that is the central thing that I think is a point that should uphold under any circumstance. That I do think that the situation is in Israel, whether or not, like, there's a whole spectrum of opinion you could hold about the relationship of Israel and Palestine in various conflict. A lot of what is being done is not actually clear in what it's saying, and in fact, a lot of it is very much being like, it's just people being tools in the hands of Hamas.
Right.
And so I think that's what's in common between some of the stuff now and some of the stuff in October.
Right. So, but in that case, it was a similar sort of, yesterday
Day of Rage or whatever.
Yeah, but it was similar to what you were saying yesterday about working out your contramundum muscles, and so here was another incident related to this where you see the thing and you go, well, if they're celebrating the massacre of Jews, I've got a kippah that I was given as a gift, and I'm going to go put it on and go walk through that mob as a way of showing solidarity and just resisting the celebration of evil, right? So these are two instances of facing the anarchy, but this was also not your first run-in with masked bullies.
Yeah.
So maybe rewind the clock about 4 years and maybe tell us a little bit about the last run-in with masked bullies, this time with badges.
Yeah. So in that instance, I'm sure plenty of people are familiar, though I'm also sure not everyone is. Me and my brother, we protested some of the actions of our local police department in 2020 after they had arrested people at a protest, a psalm sing protest combined, and it was an illegal arrest. That was and the protesters were protesting very ridiculous laws, and so we went downtown during the night to put up some stickers protesting the actions of the city government. And so when we were doing that, some police were called. They were masked. They put me in handcuffs and on the ground. Yeah. So we're still dealing with the legal aftermath.
And we can say put them in handcuffs and on the ground, and then hid video for a year and perjured themselves in hearings, and this was, of course, and this is one interesting thing here is this: you talk about the justified class now. Yeah. People who are allowed to do things, people who aren't allowed to do things. You actually had experience with selective prosecution here in your hometown, in your home state. You protested the now, as a matter of law, established to have been illegal arrests. Like, it's been adjudicated. The judge has spoken. Like, the arrests were illegal. The cops were behaving in an illegal way. They were lawbreakers. And you protested the lawbreaking of the police force, and then were handcuffed and prosecuted selectively as the first person in history to ever be prosecuted under this ordinance, this defunct ordinance. So you were selectively prosecuted for placing a sign or a flyer on a pole without permission. And that's now been years long. We've just gone through oral arguments in the Idaho Court of Appeals, and it's been ridiculous. But then you go out there and you have people breaking the law, defying, criminal trespass, criminal mischief, all sorts of things going on in Colombia, and nothing is happening. Like, so you have the selective prosecution and you have selective non-prosecution. During the George Floyd riots, one of the things I remember talking to you at the dining room table one of your big frustrations was watching the cities burn, like all this criminal behavior, the destruction of the rule of law just being allowed, tolerated, not prosecuted, not pursued. And then, of course, we have people in our community getting arrested at a psalm sing at the same time. And just that hypocrisy. But now you've seen it from the other angle. You've seen Selective, what happens when people selectively don't prosecute out in New York, and you end up trying to hold a door when the cops won't show up. And out here, you've been selectively prosecuted. What I'm kind of the question here is, how jaded are you at this point?
Probably fairly jaded, because a lot of why I think there was a lot of the problem that we had in Idaho was small town corruption, just bias, wanting to the concept of selective prosecution. They kind of had to be aware of who they wanted to selectively prosecute, who they didn't like. And in this instance, it's more of just big city lawlessness fueled by Marxist, like activist DAs. So it's definitely different manifestations of a similar thing in very different contexts. And it really does just hammer home how you can't take for granted that the rule of law and justice will be upheld. It's not in a small town. It's not in a big city. It's not because you have a good constitutional framework, a good municipal state framework. It's because there are actually people who uphold it in those positions. You actually need leadership who will uphold it, who will make the decision to act in particular situations. And so because of that, it is a bit disconcerting and not particularly encouraging, given that a lot of people are not so willing to do that when they have their own necks sticking out.
Okay, so back out here then, and my question is, so now I want to get into the in the absence, so you got the narco-tyranny thing happening here, right? You've got the mobs sometimes, and then you've got petty tyranny sometimes, and it just depends on when they want to pull out which tool, right? But it's all in
New York has gone after Trump a little bit.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we were in Minneapolis for the Floyd riots, and actually I was telling last night, I remember when they were burning down Lake Street, some guys came in because they had a buddy, I think, who ran the tobacco shop, and they just came in and stood. They had AR-15, so it was a little. They were a little more threatening than you and Charles, but they were decked out, and they stood in front of that building and said, "This one's not getting burned down," and it didn't. Everything else got smashed. Everything else got destroyed, but they didn't want to tangle with that. But it was a similar deal. In the absence of in the presence of anarchy, somebody said, "Hey, we're not going to do this. This is not how things ought to be done." And you had the petty tyranny there where, restaurants that tried to stay open through COVID in order to provide for their family were just, the whole book was thrown at them in order to get them to shut down. So in that kind of society, we're called to lean in. We're called to stand up. We're called to move into it. So I'm curious now about like this generational thing here of like preparing our kids for that moment. Right. So maybe just talk a little bit. Maybe Doug, you go first. How you're back in the 80s. It's not quite clown world, but you're sort of seeing it coming. What are you thinking of in terms of how are you raising your kids so that they're ready for these kinds of moments?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things. A few years ago, maybe 10 or so. This goes back to the geezer at Sabbath dinner. My dad, now with the Lord. All of this starts earlier.
Yeah.
He was at Sabbath dinner, and one evening he said, apropos of nothing, he just announced, he said, "No sense dying with a good reputation." And I think it was Rachel said, you have a good reputation, Grandpa? And he said, "Better than it ought to be." So I grew up with that mentality. And I've made this comment before. I just finished Aaron Wren's book on Life in Negative World, which is a good book. But I grew up in Positive World. Mm-hmm. And for us, Positive World was Negative World. Positive World was worldly, and Positive World was they're So my dad had all sorts of contrarian instincts, and passed them on to us. And some of the early skirmishes, there was a proposition, I forget what year it was, that had homosexuality on the ballot here in Idaho. And I was speaking on a panel for the League of Women Voters, and they must have flown 150 homosexual activists from New York. New York keeps coming up in this. And they filled the room, had signs, Idaho's too great for hate. And it was really rowdy. And I had a note written beforehand. I wrote a note for the moderator, call the cops. So I didn't have to write it. I could just slide it over. And I remember a woman, homosexual lady, yelling, I think it was after the event, yelling at us going out. In 10 years, your kids are ours. In 10 years, your kids are ours. And I think, and we were saying, no, by the grace of God, no, we've got another.
That's not quite how it went. I was
okay. Because you were there, right?
I was there.
You were there. Okay.
But he was just a little kid.
Yeah. What does he know? All right. So what was your version?
We were. It was near the end. There were two places where Dad. What you started to say is like, by the grace of God. No, like, you actually just laughed at her.
I did that too.
You laughed at her and said, I think I don't remember if it was not my kids or not our kids.
Yeah.
It was like,
that's the exact.
And laughed.
That's the exact.
And laughed. And it was, my dad has a thing where when he starts to laugh, he coughs and slaps his chest.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was one of those moments where.
Okay, so
and he started.
So how old were you for that?
I think I was 12.
Probably 12. Okay, so you saw, hey, I'm gonna go. I got to go stand up here and resist some folly and sin and wickedness in the public square. And hey, Nate, come along. You're gonna bring your 12-year-old to that and have him sit amongst the harpies.
Right. There was no sitting, and it was standing room only.
Okay.
It was jam packed, and I was down with the activists. I was next to this middle-aged dude with feather earrings and some bulging veins on his neck because he wouldn't stop spitting and screaming. He's very near stroke the whole time, and gave me one of my strongest and best of images of all this as a child, which was him holding up the middle finger with one hand and a no hate here sign with the other.
Okay.
And I was standing there kind of looking at this guy while he was screaming at my father, and the jangly earring, the feather bouncing around, and the middle finger and the sign, and he was spitting. It was just spittle flying.
Yeah.
And
middle finger, one hand, no hate, no hate here.
Yeah. It was like, okay, this is interesting. And there were two moments in that evening when Dad really broke down laughing and got the cough thing going. One was when you used an example of a business owner should have a right to hire fire based on however they want, even if they're being a bigot, they have the right. It's their business. And you said, let's say you own an Arby's, and somebody yelled, "Why Arby's, Doug?" and you got really cracked up. And he fully stopped and just had a laugh session on the stage, and the whole room just kind of slowly fizzled while he was amused.
I worked it out. And then I said, look, I know we have a lot of differences, but it seems to me that I should be able to say Arby's.
Yeah. It was great. Then later, like as it was progressing, somebody started yelling the threats of your kids are ours, and he laughed again and said, "Not my kids."
That was out in the hallway afterwards, I think.
So,
you
were still on. You actually this little dispute. You were exiting stage, but you're still up. Like I was still not with you.
She was still yelling at Greg Dickinson and me.
Probably.
It was still.
And
anyway, there was a lot of.
Was she the one spitting on people?
There was a lot of yelling.
There was a lot of
spitting and yelling, and I was there for it.
Okay,
yep.
Yeah. So and so at 12, what was your kind of like? You're observing, but like you're 12. Like it's like, what in the heck is this? Like what? I mean, what were you thinking? Like what was the impact at the moment?
It was just a fun day at the zoo.
Okay. Okay.
It wasn't anything much more than this is just kind of something Dad was doing. I mean, like I remember looking at one of the death threats that came in the mail. There's a skull that you could see through an envelope that was on something. I remember looking at that on East Street, like they got the mail, and that kind of thing was pretty fun. It was fun for me as a dad to see these videos of Rory.
Take your kid to work day.
Take your kid to work day.
But it was fun because Rory, it turns out, you can appreciate this. he's got troublemaker on both sides of his family. Like genetically, he's bred for trouble. On one side in the family lineage, he's got sparks, and on the other, he's got upward. And those, it's just like the sparks fly upward. He was born for trouble. But your other grandfather was probably at those 1960s riots in Colombia, just on the wrong side. but the thing that's fun, I told your grandfather on your mom's side earlier today, it's like he's got all the trouble genes, but luckily he's got my dad's chill. And it was funny watching him up at the door, because it was like watching Dad in Bloomington, Indiana, or back in that moment when I was 12, you were on stage and he had a pre-written note to call the cops, but he was still there. Like he was ready to go. And then just at various times seeing the blood pressure stay really, really, really low, and watching how tension and emotions run, how it feeds off of antagonism. And so Rory's chill at the door was destabilizing. It was extremely destabilizing.
Really was.
So the most powerful thing he was doing up there was not stressing out. Charles was great, and I love Charles. Big fan of Charles. I don't know him at all, other than just know of him as one of Rory's friends. But getting to watch him on film, he was very Reepicheap, and like just all about the fight, and very he was burning hot. Charles was running hot and in fun ways that I admired. But he was feeding off the crowd. The crowd was feeding off of him, and it was like this thing. Whereas Rory was a black hole of emotional stress.
He just stepped outside the door to get a breath of fresh air.
And so your amusement, you're not getting upset, telling Charles not to escalate, like just that low blood pressure is really hard to deal with. When people are trying to get amped and you're not getting amped back, it's hard to play ping pong when the ball just bounces off your stomach. You're there, you're obstructing, but you're not being emotional. So it was funny for me kind of sitting in the middle, because I have many memories of watching Dad have chill, in really hot situations. And then looking down and be like, hey, you've got the chill gene. Good job, Rory. Because you also have the not chill gene in your genetic lineage. We know that's there too. His great grandmother actually carried a soapbox around Brooklyn. She actually had a literal soapbox. She was tiny. She would get up on to harangue people as a Marxist Jew, working to like instill the revolution in Brooklyn. So there's that in your genetic lineage too. I'm glad that the chill showed up when it mattered. But that's actually a really, really important thing. And I think that on Twitter, everywhere else, you see a bunch of conservative Christians having no chill. There's none. And they're feeding the outrage. They actually are part of this cycle of just escalating ridiculousness. And the more they can actually, I think postmillennialism is a big part of this, but more they can just trust God and calm down.
Right.
And just.
Rory, earlier, when we were talking earlier today, Rory, you used a great phrase about many right-wing sites are basically rage farms.
Right. Yeah.
And of course the left does the same thing too, but rage farming is not effective. What it does is gives authority to rage farmers on the other side.
Right. Yeah.
I
actually think the algorithms really hurt this too.
Right.
And have helped with a lot of, Instagram and others are actually looking for those things that will confirm your sympathies already.
Right.
And amplify like your behavior, that's already going on. And so both sides are being fed algorithm selected things. And one side's only seeing all the horrors of Gaza, and the other side's seeing anti-Semitism, and both are just getting more outraged. Rage farms are like wind farms, and you're trying to make all the blades turn.
Right. Well, so this is, I finished writing an article today on how aggrieved people are easily manipulated. Right.
Yeah.
So like just the feeding of the rage, fear, anger, those kind of emotions are just gin that up, and you've just got massive steering wheels for large groups of people. And so the chill, the sober-minded, I'm going to be calm. I'm going to be Paul, who watches everybody, he's going through mob after mob, completely in control of himself. Right. Rolling with whatever punches come. He's not trying to manage it. He's not trying to control it. He's just looking, there's going to be an opportunity here. I'll just be ready to take it when it comes. And that sort of thing is the sort of Christian answer to the mob.
And our friends, or let's say our misguided friends, people who would care about the same values that we do, would listen to us talking about.
Are you talking about the idiots, or are you talking about our friends?
I'm talking about the based bros.
Our idiot friends.
Well, some of them are idiots. I'm going to be chill here.
Are you including the idiots? I just want are the idiots in or the idiots
Look at
out?
me be chill.
So nuanced.
Some of them are
Mucho
idiots.
nuance there.
Some are not idiots, but there are people who are. They're going to look at us commending this calmness, and they're going to say, "You guys don't care, right? You guys don't care. Why don't you show some passion?" Well, it's because the passion puts you in the position of making bad decisions.
I just say we're big fans of winning, not losing.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who love to lose. They really love it, and they snatch that L so fast.
Mm-hmm.
And then lick their wounds and get to be all outraged and
blame the Jews.
Yep.
Yeah. Rory, do you remember growing up anything in particular like that either your grandpa or your dad did in terms of like, so similar things where, so Doug takes Nate to that event and it's kind of like, oh, this is how it goes. So I need to learn something here. You remember anything in particular from your upbringing where you kind of seminal moments of like, oh, I got to get ready for that?
Definitely. It's hard to distinguish some of them. I actually remember a debate with, I believe, Andrew Sullivan that you had pop up. And it was, I remember you being heckled by some of the questioners. They were very disrespectful. So as far as the discussions about homosexuality and gay marriage, I know that you had a couple of those debates, and I definitely remember some flack hitting. It doesn't seem like it was nearly as extreme as the one that my dad described, but that's just something that immediately comes off the top of my head, where just maintaining composure even when people are being quite nasty and disrespectful. Then there was just plenty of stuff just around town, harassment that Logos School was getting when they're trying to go get CUP permits, or it's hard for me to even keep track of all of it.
Your truck got how about your truck getting vandalized?
Yeah, my truck got vandalized. Someone spray painted pedo or pedophile on it. So
was scum,
maybe they just meant pedo Baptist. Maybe they just were.
Yeah, I think it was pedo scum.
Okay. Yeah. You sure it just wasn't Baptists who were really upset about infant baptism?
No, it wasn't pedo Baptist.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was pedophile scum.
Okay.
I don't think it was the local Southern Baptists.
we had a really regular rhythm in our old house. We were not far from a tire center, a couple of blocks away. And we had a very regular rhythm of, rolling down the hill to the tire center to get the next screw taken out. I mean, the car tires were constantly in jeopardy. I had somebody get in my truck and relieve themselves on the driver's seat. Rory's truck was vandalized. And you were, it was your first vehicle. This was like, Rory can drive now. Mm-hmm. He had put a Christchurch magnet on it, and that magnet was forever a different color than everybody else's because it was in the pedo scum paint that was fixed on everything else. So it's sort of this is a thing that
constant drip.
There's just this has been there. During COVID and during the shutdowns, and I would actually back up and Rory talk about you as a kid. I'm gonna talk about you a little bit in ways that you won't like. Okay. Rory has, when I say he's got chill, he really does have the chill. But this is not something that is accidental. He also burns hot. He can feel very deeply. This is a little kid who, when his great grandfather died, he went in the backyard and threw all his money in the grass. And it was just like, I don't even want it. It's just like, it's all stupid. It's all vanity. And you were really not old when you did that. I mean, that was, we had to pick it up and talk about it. But it's like, the Jewish passion, as long as we're going to own the Jewish identity here and get hated by all the right people, burns hot like it does. And then you add the Scottish and, it really kind of doubles.
The bad mix there.
Yeah, it doubles. So the concept of being chill, this isn't one of those things where there's no temptation to burn hot. when you were first seeing all the COVID stuff and we were looking at Floyd and all the Floyd riots, we had a lot of conversations about the nature of protest and private property and defending the rule of law and all this kind of stuff. Cause it's like it's not like, oh, he was just chill. He wasn't mad. When you say you were bothered by the day of rage when these guys were all celebrating the slaughter of innocent Israelis, it's like, okay, you're bothered by this. Now, how do you actually in a helpful way respond? Like what is actually a helpful response? It's what you were saying, why people think you don't care or that you're not passionate or you don't feel it, as opposed to that your horses are well-trained.
I'd say I was pretty angry.
Yeah. Yeah, but you weren't running around slapping people.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like in terms of how it went, how it went at all. Although I will say at this point, you did tell me that you had more butterflies before doing some news interviews than you did at the door with the mob. So
yeah, that's
so
true.
that was pretty chill. But those nerve endings, the news interview endings will be dead pretty soon. Those nerve endings will all be cauterized after this round of viral behavior.
So this is the governing the passion. So the passion's there, the deep feeling is there, but it's channeled in a fruitful, productive direction, as opposed to just going, jumping on your horse and riding off in all directions.
Yeah. And if you think of them as, if you think of your passions as horses, it's like, are they unbroken?
Right.
Unbridled. It's like, can you imagine, could you picture a really, really big horse, highly trained, like those kind of draft horses that can reverse a wagon at the rodeo, like they're all stepping in stride and all working towards something. But big Belgians, they don't have to be feeble to be really calm and under control and able to work productively towards something.
And the other thing to keep in mind here is that the left, with their untethered passions, they can do that because for them it works. Mm-hmm. It works short term. It doesn't build anything.
Right.
But in terms of their goals of tearing down and destruct
and steering,
Saul Alinsky would not have any problem using that kind of impatient. What do we want? When do we want it?
Right now.
Right. What do we want? Time travel. When do we want it? It doesn't matter. We want it now. So revolutionaries are impatient, and reformers are patient. Right. And there was the scene at the door was a study in contrast between patience on the one hand and surging impatience on the other. So conservatives, if conservatives try to play whataboutism, well, you get to riot, we get to riot.
Yeah.
Well,
where's my mob?
Yeah, where's my mob? We first, God says you don't get to, and you obey God. But look what happens when you try it. Well, that with the J6 protesters, they went in and they found out, the authorities do know how to use jails and prisons and fines.
Yep.
And, they do know how to wreck your life and come after you. They're just not doing it selectively, which is why the left can do what they do.
Right.
And the right can't because God says not to. And the establishment says we're going to come down on you. It's just not effective.
Right.
Yeah. One of the things I've said repeatedly over the last year or so is don't take the bait, don't take the bait. And what Rory was doing at the door was encouraging Charles to not take the bait. That's what we were talking about earlier. Standing there calmly is refusing to take the bait. You're not putting them in charge of your emotions. You're not letting them set the agenda. You're saying, Christopher Dawson said the Christian church lives in the light of eternity and can afford to be patient. God's writing the story. We can let him write the story. The fact that you were there, Rory, at the right time, just the right moment, racked out of bed, go down there, and who choreographed this? Mm-hmm. Well, I think God.
God did. Yeah.
It is funny. I think it was your real commencement ceremony, by the way.
Because you might not get another one.
That was the commencement ceremony. You had a bunch of people invited to your party. You got to stand up front. Apparently, you were a valedictorian. It's great.
So some people aren't going to have League of Women voter meetings where everybody's yelling at your dad, or going to be present at the mob, or they're not going to get the practice. So part of it, it sounds like there was a lot of practice that went into getting ready for a moment like that. what are some ways that you would say to parents, hey, but that moment might come for my kid. They might be on that college campus. They might be in that situation, and I need to be doing things to get them ready. So what would be just like, and I'm thinking of kind of the normal mundane preparation sorts of stuff. And so I'll throw out one, and then you guys riff on that however you want. So like about 10 years ago, I think you and I had a conversation. It was right after Ashtown came out, and we were talking about the books and things like that. And one of the observations, one of the things we were talking about was how the way the story always goes is you have a corrupt historic institution that is decaying and because of its own cowardice, its own internal corruption, it's just falling into ruin. Yep. It's the leaders have coddled the monsters that are now threatening it. And in the moment of crisis, the cowardly, corrupt leaders bail, and the only people that are left are the faithful ones they banished for standing up all along the way. The exiles return to defend the institutions. Ashtown has multiple scenes that are kind of like, that's the climax of the thing, is here's the institution that needs to be defended by the former enemies.
By the outsiders,
right? Who came
People
back.
who are getting kicked and treated unfairly.
Right.
And
so you wrote that story, right? You're writing stories like that. And then now it's like, that's literally what just happened.
Yeah.
Right? Like the Colombia was built by Christians. The Ivies were built by Christians. And then we've been, banished, exiled, and then now here's, Presbyterian standing in front of the door saying, no, you can't burn this place down.
You shall not pass.
You shall not pass. So it strikes me that like there's an element there of just kind of like, what stories do you tell your kids? How do their imaginations get shaped by how do these stories go, and which character do you want to be? Are there other things like that, or you want to expand on that at all?
This story you just outlined is pretty much the only one.
Okay, that's just the story.
That's the story. Yeah. That's Aragorn and Denethor.
Yeah,
Gondor is corrupt. It's Ashtown. It's Saul and David. It's
Book of Judges.
It's just over and over and over again.
Okay.
Yep. Coming in out of the wilderness.
Yeah, ready to go. So what are some other things in terms of like how do parents get their kids ready for those moments?
It doesn't take like crazy rallies and stuff. It takes I don't know. I should I don't know how much I should share from my kids' upbringing, but I would say it takes all the small training. It doesn't take the big stuff. Is not really that important. It's more like the quizzes along the way. It's when something goes down, when Rory's truck got vandalized, there was an opportunity to take a quiz, see how we were doing. Mm-hmm. But that was not the training. The training has to do with who eats the bigger strawberry. The training has to do with, do you hit your sister or not, even if she's being awful. The training happens in all the tiny, tiny little stupid things of like, your mom told you to mow the lawn and you still haven't mowed the lawn. It's really simple stuff of, do you have control over your actions, as opposed to do your feelings have control over your actions? It's pretty simple self-control stuff. So do you have the ability to control what you choose to do, and to control that you do it at your best and your highest, and you're giving it to God, in all the little things, all the little moments of selfishness when they're 2 is when it matters. And then 3, and then 4. And I can tell you that no parents have to go looking for those. Those are just going to be there. They're going to absolutely show up constantly. And if you actually successfully train your kids there, then they're going to get tested and so on. And it's not like other generations before this one haven't had giant tests. Mm-hmm. They really have.
Right.
Boomer days when the whole generation was going, nuts.
Right.
Just your ability to stand up to a crowd right now is nuts. And World War II wasn't like that was calm. Do you actually have control over your actions and your choices, or do your feelings control?
An additional thing I would add to that, I agree with everything you said there, but one particular subset for the day-to-day training of your kids is sort of on the positive side. The negative correction, negative discipline, where you're correcting for misbehavior. But if they're in a Christian school, or they're, which they ought to be, right? If they're in that situation, they're going to be surrounded by good Christian kids who care a lot about grades, honors, faculty commendations,
doing well,
doing well, getting the praise of the people in charge. And this could be taken wrong, so don't take it wrong. But you have to teach your kids to not care that much or care in the wrong way about honors.
Okay.
Right? Because if you Jesus says, how can you believe when you receive honor from one another? If there's a horizontal kind of honor giving and receiving, and there's a catch-22 in this, because the Bible tells us to render honor. We're supposed to render honor, but the person who's receiving it should not like it very much.
should hold it loosely.
Yeah. So when I'm frequently honored by people as a pastor, thank you for being a good pastor. I know that they're being told by God in the Bible to do this to me, and I'm also told to not like it.
Right? Yeah. To not entrust yourself to that. To not
because as soon as I start to like it, if kids grow up grade nerds, or I've got to be the faculty commendation, or I've got to be the class president. I've got to have these honors. People who are hungry for honors, you mentioned being easily steered another way, but honors is a really good way for the man to steer you by just threatening to take them away.
Because you're still being led by your affections.
Right.
It's just that your affections, your passions are focused on something that everybody agrees is valuable.
Yeah.
And so you're not driven by your decision making and your ability to pursue the true good and beautiful for its own sake, but you're out of your feels. And so if you are in that situation, it can really you can be led anywhere because somebody's going to take your gold star away.
Yeah.
There was the League of Women Voters rally thing, but there's also a moment for me sophomore year of high school where I got a 0 on a test unjustly. And that for me was also probably one of the more momentous lessons, because it's the only reason why I didn't graduate with a 4.0. And Dad told me basically to suck it up. And it's like, that was like, hey, here's a great exercise in injustice. And the world's not fair and we don't care, and just roll. Like, just roll with it. And we could have won on appeal. We could have fought. We could have taken it up to the board level. And Dad told me, we're not going to do that. And,
right.
It's not worth it.
Yeah.
Because, it's like we're just going to roll with it and not have a big fight at the board level, because we could have a big fight at the board level and then we'd win a grade, but we'd have spent all of this friction. So you're just going to take this in the teeth.
Right.
That's how this is going to go. That was really, that was a pretty significant moment in my adolescent development. Rory had a few of these, but we talked when he was little about, and I mentioned this on Stories or Soul Food, but if somebody's picking on your sister at recess, you take care of it. And it doesn't matter if you end up in the principal's office.
Right.
You deal with it. I don't care if you end up the recess monitor grabbing you. You don't run tattle. You take responsibility for the situation. You take care of it there. But Rory also, I was sitting at my desk about 11:45-ish or so, late, and Rory texted, which meant very late for you, saying that it was interesting tonight and a mob took over a building and they carried Charles away. I'll tell you more tomorrow. And it was like, well, we can talk now.
I got time.
But Heather, my wife, jumped on Twitter and Rory was
Everywhere,
all over Twitter.
Everywhere.
It was like, yeah, it got a little interesting. I'll tell you more tomorrow. And we're like, no, let's talk about this right now. Let's get through it. But it was another late night message. But it is really, really interesting to watch how many people that we would blanket cover as our friends, who are just led easily led, just, a ring through the snout, led by their passions. And just because they hate something they're supposed to hate, or love something they're supposed to love, doesn't mean that they're in any way valuable on the battlefield. And I would much rather them just stay home and cancel their social media and just grow in wisdom until they can no longer be, infuriated by a thistle in their yard and can deal with it dispassionately. Because it's when you're led by your passions, it does not matter at all if your passions are currently pointed in the right place. They will betray you. They will be handles for your enemies, and they will betray all those of us who are in any way
relying on you,
connected to you, friends with you. It's much, much, much better to just focus on the development of self-control.
Right. So that's the thing. So if we're thinking, I'm gonna have one more question that I want you guys to answer for the group, but wrapping up that part is really take responsibility for what you ought to take responsibility for. So you're training your kids daily. Take responsibility for this, take responsibility for that, disciplining for when passions get out of control, and then telling them the right story so they have the right expectations, so that they don't think and expect that everything's going to go easy for them, or that they wouldn't end up on the wrong side of a mob, or the wrong side of the authorities, or the wrong side of peer pressure, because fear of man and man-pleasing are just two sides of the same coin. And so you're going to get pressure from all these different places. Your job is to train the contra mundum muscles, not knowing if the mundum, is going to be fellow Christians. Yep. Is it going to be the cops? Is it going to be the New York State authorities? Is it going to be a mob of Marxists? You don't know who Mundum is going to be, but you need to be prepared to be contra.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. For Athanasius, Mundum was the world of bishops.
Right. It was the clergy.
It was not the pagan Romans.
Yeah.
It was the whole ecclesiastical world that Athanasius was standing up to.
Right. So maybe last thing, and each of you can weigh in on this. If you were going to talk to kids, I'm thinking junior high, high schoolers. They're growing up in this world. They're growing up in clown world, trash world, whatever we want to call it. And it's unraveling. Anything in particular that you'd want to say to that cohort, not just to the parents. Parents are going to watch this, hopefully be helped by it. But what would you say to young people? So Rory, thinking, start with you coming up, you got your brothers still in high school. You've got, cousins who are younger than that, people their age. What would you say to them as you've kind of walked through a couple of really high tense situations, high stakes situations? What counsel, what advice, what would you tell them? What should they be doing right now in order to get ready for what God might have for
them? Given that I haven't raised anyone, this is a bit out of my range of experience, but I would probably say a couple things. There'd be the day-to-day experience of pressure to go a certain direction. I think sometimes that's actually harder to deal with than just individual situations that are extreme. Because an extreme situation, when someone's telling you to deny Christ or something and everyone's screaming at you, it's pretty easy to know what you're supposed to do in those. Well, and there are extreme instances that are more ambiguous and it is confusing, but the ability to be immune to social pressure, where, and one thing that I've found interesting, like if there's anything that some Marxists are good at, because they're good at tearing down things, is identifying power structures to tear down. They're not good at, and I've definitely experienced that at Colombia, where they've reproduced an entire system of social pressure according to their own liking. And people really do crumble under that. They really do just day by day seem to move in the direction of the mob, even subconsciously. And so if you're able to identify where people are manipulating you and to separate that from your principles, then, and you can do that just on the daily, I would say, then you can think about the extreme instances. So that would be what I'd tell someone, especially if they're going to come to a secular school. Which I wouldn't recommend a lot of people come to Colombia. I think it was the right decision for me personally, but definitely would not be for everyone. It is kind of a crazy place, but I'd try to draw the contrast between the two, the day-to-day and then the extreme cases.
Nate, what would you say to kids?
Metaphorically, I think even what Rory was talking about, it's exactly like how they were carrying Charles away. And how they were trying to pry Rory off the door. They weren't trying to do it with a hammer to the head. Those are those extreme cases that he's talking about. It's this just like, we're going to have this crowd pressure and we're going to link arms and we're just going to boa constrictor you away. And if you are susceptible to belonging, if you're susceptible to any kind of approval of any kind, so awards, if you need those good grades, then you'll see some kid who went through a great ACCS school and they were a good student and they were a valedictorian and they've always gotten approval. Now they're trying to get the approval of some other, some clown, some Marxist in the front of the classroom. And you'll find they'll edit things out and shift and adjust. And they're not just being cunning. They're not just being wise as a serpent. They're actually just licking dirt. Yeah. They're doing their version of licking dirt and not being them and not willing to suffer, not willing to take the consequences of turning away from approval. God trains his prophets by making them socially pariahs. It's like, you're going to be naked for 3 years. And believe me, at the end of this, you're going to be ready to be immune to the thoughts of a crowd.
Right.
It's like your immunity to social pressure would just be off the charts. And I think a lot of the weird things he makes his prophets do in scripture are all about that.
Right. Kind of burning off the people-pleasing nerve ending, right? I'm just going to sear that bad boy right off.
We're searing this off. You're cooking over dung.
Yeah.
You're married to a prostitute.
Yeah.
It's just all this. Yeah. All this stuff. But Rory, when he was little and he was playing baseball, then football, youth football, I would ask him, I was like, hey, are the kids on your team Christians? Like, how many of them are Christians? And he went, we've never really discussed this, although I'm sure you remember this, Rory. You went through and methodically asked every single kid on the football team if he was a Christian. And then part of the reason why I had that conversation is because I wanted him to have the muscle of just asking people.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, are you a Christian? Like, that's something that people don't want to actually do. They're socially nervous about it, and building up those kinds of muscles, and then also having to build up the muscles of overreaction, or somebody's in a horrible situation, or this person's terrible. They're being outrageous. Should I be outraged? It's like that kind of thing. And so a lot of I used to really heckle Rory and have a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun debating at the dinner table, and I would try to rattle his cage in different ways. But then we'd all talk about never, ever, ever, ever play chess angry or upset it's You cannot play chess emotionally. You just can't. You will lose every single time. So it's not the easiest thing, but every single kid has the opportunity to embrace not being cool.
Right.
It's
a cool shame.
Cool shame. If you see your kid needing anything where they want something because it's cool, like, you need to back up because you're already on the slide. Right. You're not at the top of the slide. They're already, alert to it and care about it and, and kind of getting into it in unhelpful ways. So they're susceptible to that.
Yeah. So if you see, so this would be the thing. If you see that in your kid, you're saying you need to figure out a way.
It's already a problem.
It's already a problem, and you need to do something. Like, the kid, you need to say to your son, hey, here's this thing. You're going to have to go take a risk here. Put yourself out there to try to sear that cool shame nerve.
Not even just that. If you have a son and he really, really cares, and I'm talking about he's 10, and I'm not, he's 10 and he just really cares what kind of haircut he has. It's like, you're in trouble. Like, you're already in trouble. If he really cares that I really want this thing, and he's got this mimetic thing going on. I need this thing that other kids have. I need this baseball bat because that's what they have. I need, I need this shirt. I need that brand of shoes.
All the symbols of belonging.
Yeah. And and you have to try to really pressure them to objectively pursue things that are superior, that are excellent, that are good, regardless of what anyone around you says. So you don't want to be simply contrarian. So if, Rory's brother is picking out a pair of court shoes for his next basketball season, and he really likes a pair of shoes that also happens to be really popular and cool, if he's got a pair of Kobe's, it's like, the question is, are they actually excellent? Are these actually a good pair of shoes? Not, are these something that are going to get you likes and clicks and shares? It's like, it just can't be that at all. But there's plenty of people. I had a kid on one of my teams where I just said, you're not practicing again until your hair's cut off. Like, I don't want to see you touch your hair again. It was just, and it's not like
it's the vanity. There's a vanity that's being cultivated there.
It's being habituated, and it wasn't like a big chronic issue. It's just, I see this little catechism, this little habituation showing up, and how you're messing with your hair. We're going to cut that off. We need to cut that off before the next practice. That kind of thing shows up pretty early, and it's always mimetic. And so when kids are looking sideways and wanting what other people have, and they want it because other people have it, that's a big issue. Or they want to be envied, they envy and want to be envied. It causes all sorts of problems and makes them really, really vulnerable.
Right, to the steering.
So I think there's a comedian, I don't know, show notes we should find, but it's a brilliant bit of this guy saying that everybody says they don't care what anybody thinks. Everybody says that. But you don't really transition into that zone until you're wearing Kirkland jeans. It's like, when somebody's wearing the Kirkland Costco jeans, they don't actually care what anybody thinks. Right. And it's a joke, but it's actually there's a lot of truth to it.
Right.
And that doesn't mean don't pursue the beautiful, don't pursue the excellent. I'm a big fan of trying to do that. But why?
Yeah.
It's got to be because it's God honoring, because it's objectively superior, whether or not other people like it. Other people can love it. I like Pappy Van Winkle's whiskey. It's amazing. Is there hype around it? Yeah, there's hype around it. But I need to like it when there's not hype around it, when there is hype around it, like in order to know that there's objectivity.
Yeah. Doug, you got anything for the kids?
Yeah. I agree with everything Rory said and what Nate said. Amen to that. The thing I would add is for kids in that age group, I would say the difference between Peter Pevensey and Eustace Clarence Scrubb was the kind of stories that they had taken in. So I would say give yourself to the kind of stories that will shape you in what you will find yourself acting like Sam Gamgee. You will find yourself acting because you've been admiring it in the story for 4 or 5 years. And God has designed stories to be a shaping. They're not shaping in the primary sense of actually acting out, apologizing to your sister or to resisting the cool shame at school. That's you in real time. This is a secondary catechesis. It's a secondary way of reinforcing all the impulses you want to reinforce, whether it's Narnia or Middle Earth or other great stories where you can identify with the protagonist and not be worried about it.
Good.
Stories do give you a great mirror. So when you are misbehaving and when you're a little bit older and you're not just in discipline, your parents aren't just going to try to force you to be good. They have to talk you through it and help you actually build the muscle yourself. If they have a vocabulary of storytelling and characters, then it's really helpful to be able to say, like, who are you being right now? Let's replay the scene and let's talk about which character you're being like. What are you actually being like? Most kids, most humans, I think, cannot accurately describe themselves, ever. They can feel the scene, but it takes a lot of work to be able to see themselves in the scene on the instant replay in a way that they could actually correct and mature.
And it can go pretty young too.
Yeah.
Little Billy tormenting his sister.
Right.
Mom says, "Are you St. George right now, or are you the dragon right now?"
Yeah. Right.
Which one are you here?
Yeah.
We actually, my kids thought that a Sid was a word, and it just became that way, kind of a Wilson pigeon, a Sid. But we started with Toy Story and the character Sid, who just destroys toys for no reason, just the pleasure of destruction. And we actually use that character to say, no, you will not just be destructive.
Right.
Do you want to be that guy on screen with the terrible room and just tearing toys apart? They're just toys, but who's just destroying for no reason. And it's like, no, you don't want to be that guy. Let's not be that guy. Don't be a Sid. And so for the younger ones, just a Sid. They didn't have the Rory and his sister had Sid in the language, but the younger two thought that
a Sid was a thing.
A Sid was like the whole word. A Sid. Don't be a Sid. But we talked with Rory was little. It was and this is something I think, just as a side note, throwaway. People who think masculinity is just, stomping on rodents and killing bugs, being cruel to snakes or whatever. It just isn't. It's not that. It's not violence. It's not just instinctive destruction and violence. It can be that when it's unbridled. But when Rory was young, we also talked about, like, you just won't step on an ant if you see it. If you see the ant, don't kill it. Don't crush it for no reason. If it's on the kitchen counter, by all means.
Yeah,
right. There's justice in the world.
That's right. He should have known better.
We're not just being cruel to be cruel.
Right.
We're not just being destructive to something God crafted and loves for no reason. And just instilling that and little things like that in little manageable ways is a very, very helpful thing.
I still remember a book I read as a boy, one of these English school stories. And a boy got into a fist fight with another boy because the other boy was pulling wings off of flies.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was
Right.
Oh, good job.
That's right.
You know, good. That
I think C.S. Lewis read that same
I was
book,
gonna
right?
say, C.S. Lewis read that too.
Paralandra, right?
God, the Paralandra, yeah.
That's right. Ripping the backs off the frogs. Well, good.
Yep.
Thank you guys for this. This was a special Doug and Friends, and presumably we'll be back in June with another one, unless something else happens.
Yeah.
Rory,
Which it might.
try to just,
Could you just graduate?
could you just, can we just commence?
There you go. Very good. Thanks for joining us on Doug and Friends. We'll see you next time.
That's the life I want. I want to be 70 and have 18 grandchildren. Let's go.
I came from the mud. There's dirt on my hand. Strong like a tree. There's roots where I stand.
I'm Tucker Carlson, and I am here with the very famous and highly controversial Pastor Doug Wilson.
even more controversial.
Not tomorrow.